In this video, another anthology book from Geeks-Line Publishing. This time, it's a look at Nintendo's Purple Lunchbox. Hi everyone, John here. So far, I've reviewed a few books that each cover an entire library of a Nintendo console. But, as you can see, each of them has been from different publishers. Until now. From Geeks-Line Publishing and Math Manent, who previously gave us the Nintendo 64 Anthology, comes the GameCube Anthology. So, if you've seen what the Nintendo 64 Anthology is like, you pretty much have a good idea of what to expect. The GameCube Anthology is an exhaustively researched book, featuring a look at every GameCube game from every region, as well as a detailed history and a look at the hardware. Just about anything you can think of that is at all related to the GameCube is in here. First, let's learn about this little purple box. Or Indigo, as Nintendo calls it. The first major section of the GameCube Anthology is the history of the GameCube. Nearly 50 pages about its origins, launch, lifespan, and legacy. While I remember many of the major events as they happened from reading sites such as IGN back in the day, reading it all here again with a lot more detail feels like a revelatory flashback, the kind where you remember what happened, but you still manage to learn something new. And I followed the development of the GameCube closely back then. So since the staggering amounts of info here amazed me, it would probably be mind-blowing to just about anyone. This whole section feels like it could only be recalled in such detail by someone at Nintendo, or very closely affiliated, yet also distanced enough to be able to be honest and critical about some choices made, or about how it fared against the competition. Simply put, it's the best history lesson on the GameCube I've ever seen. The GameCube had a fair number of challenges before it was released in 2001. Its conception would begin in the late 1990s, not long after the release of the Nintendo 64. There were difficulties in working with partners, such as Silicon Graphics, who was involved with the Nintendo 64, but had some drama and misfortunes that led to Nintendo ending their contracts with them. There were trade shows, such as E3, where Nintendo sometimes had very little or nothing to show of their upcoming machine. When they finally got everything in place, the Japanese launch in September 2001 was met with indifference, as it was only mere days after 9/11. And even once it was available, it struggled against the competition, including the best-selling video game console of all time, Sony's PlayStation 2, which already had a year head start, and Microsoft's first console, the original Xbox, which launched close to the GameCube in North America, and did decently there. Other noteworthy events in the GameCube's lifespan are covered in this section of the book. There was Capcom pledging some Resident Evil re-releases, including a then-exclusive remake of the first Resident Evil. Then the Capcom 5, which were 5 games published by Capcom, intended to be exclusive for the GameCube, though we know now that didn't quite work out. Then there was the development of Triforce arcade hardware, so named because of the joint collaboration of Nintendo, Sega, and Namco. But most of what came out of that never left Japan. Rareware, a very close partner who made the most iconic Nintendo 64 games other than Nintendo themselves, only made Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube before they were bought up by Microsoft. Another turnabout was with Square. Dissociated from Nintendo in the previous generation, Final Fantasy returns in the GameCube era, in the form of a spin-off, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. By the way, this is a game that's not fully appreciated without utilizing the link cable for the Game Boy Advance, a cable that actually does find use in over 70 GameCube games, though most often it's just to unlock bonuses or transfer data with corresponding Game Boy Advance games. But if you have the opportunity, you should definitely play The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures and Pac-Man Vs. These and other unique titles make the GameCube still popular with collectors these days. It may have had struggles with the competition and getting the third-party support it needed, but that has nothing to do with the quality and fun of the games themselves, and many of them are exclusive as they came from Nintendo themselves. Their next console, the Wii, would sell incredibly well, thanks to its motion control features. But with the exception of the Wii Mini, all Wiis are backwards compatible with GameCube games and accessories. Yet I constantly hear that people do not utilize or even know of this feature. Considering the vast difference in sales between the GameCube and the Wii, that means there are more GameCube internals in Wiis than in actual GameCubes, yet few Wiis have even had a GameCube game played in them. That's not in this book, but it is a funny thing to think about. Anyway, the fact that the GameCube lived on in the Wii, an unprecedented success for Nintendo, and that the GameCube controller is essentially the standard for all Super Smash Bros. Games moving forward, it definitely has a legacy. Speaking of hardware, anything pertaining to the GameCube is all here in the 30-page hardware section. There's a look at the actual chips involved, and a tech spec comparison with the other 6th generation consoles, including the Sega Dreamcast, Sony PlayStation 2, and Microsoft Xbox. Collectors of console variations will appreciate the catalog of color variants and special bundles. The Panasonic Q, a GameCube variation for the Japanese market that could play DVDs, earns a page here. 4 pages go into detail about the Triforce hardware for arcades, so other than F-Zero AX and Mario Kart Arcade GP, non-Japanese readers will probably see a lot here that they probably haven't encountered. Then, lots of controllers, including the Wavebird, a detailed look at the GBA cable and its features, and then the Game Boy Player, cables, and notable third-party controllers, and now you know everything about the physical world of the GameCube. Now, how about the experiences it can offer? The bulk of this book is, of course, the reviews of every single GameCube game. There are 647 games here across all regions. As mentioned at the start of this section, unlike the Nintendo 64 with its heavy reliance on Western developers, the GameCube managed to get much more Japanese support. Yet despite that, only 281 of these games were released in Japan, whereas North Americans got almost twice as many, at about 550. In any case, there are still far more GameCube games than Nintendo 64 games, but the book is about the same size as the Nintendo 64 Anthology. Though 2 to 4 reviews per page is a common sight, with so many games to cover, it's not surprising that there can be as many as 6 game reviews on a page. As before, the popular and iconic games tend to get more space, some taking up as many as 2 whole pages, like 2 of the Zelda games, Animal Crossing, and Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. Each game review has many of the expected stats, like the publisher and developer and launch dates per region. Unlike the Nintendo 64 Anthology, there aren't sales figures per game or a star rating for its rarity. At minimum, there is a screenshot and a cover shot, plus a paragraph, but it is by no means strict in its formatting, so some games may have more or less text or could have multiple screenshots of different sizes. In addition, any trivia or extra notes are indicated with a bell icon. Unique to the GameCube is its connectivity with the Game Boy Advance, so for games that utilize this, its features or unlockables are explained in an additional box. After 238 pages covering all 647 released games, you'd think this would be sufficient. But this is a Geeks-Line published anthology. There's a whole section on cancelled games, so we get to read about a couple dozen games that didn't get released for whatever reason. While some games did eventually re-emerge on other platforms, like Perfect Dark Zero on the Xbox 360 and Super Paper Mario on the Wii, many of these are little more than forgotten dreams, aside from the information and a couple screenshots that were impressively scrounged up here. Then, after a page of just screenshots, we have a page listing over 150 titles of games known to have been cancelled. Impressive, but also quite sad if at least some of these could have been released and turned out to be good. For the hardcore collector, the Collector's Corner section looks at limited edition games. Pokemon Box Ruby and Sapphire and some bonus Zelda collections are among the discs here. Then there are test versions and demo discs, of which there are many. But, perhaps defeating the purpose of demos, many of these are limited, perhaps as pre-order bonuses or from specific stores or given out at special events. There are also a multitude of multi-game discs intended for retailers to use in demo stations, though now certainly many of these discs are in collectors' hands. Finally, there's a look at compilations and bundles before the book ends with an obligatory checklist. Oh, and naturally, a Kickstarter backer listing in which you can find my name among so many others. With the Ultimate Edition of the GameCube Anthology, there's also a second book dedicated to all of the box art, just like with the Nintendo 64 Anthology. It's fun to compare the differences, sometimes subtle, sometimes blatant, between regional versions for games that were released on multiple continents. It appears to be very thorough. Nothing else to say about it, really. So, that's the gist of the GameCube Anthology. It all seems pretty good, but hey, if you know me, you know I'm going to find something to get critical about. There are multiple instances of the alphabetization of the game reviews being butchered. Sure, some rearrangement is understandable due to the amount of space allocated for each review, so that no review is interrupted by having to turn the page. For instance, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes appears before the first Metroid Prime, due to the sequel only needing a page, while the original gets 1 2/3. But then other rearrangements are more baffling, like Mario Party 4 being separated from Mario Party 5, 6, and 7 by Mario Superstar Baseball, despite the fact that all reviews are exactly half a page. Pages 124 and 125 are examples of 2 pages with 4 reviews each, yet the first is alphabetical when following a Z-shaped sequence, but the next is alphabetical in a backwards N. Then page 144 is alphabetical in a backwards Z pattern, and page 301 is a backwards Z pattern starting from the bottom, neither of which is intuitive. There are 17 games beginning with Disney, and the order makes no sense at all, especially since each review takes a quarter of a page, so the size of each review wouldn't even be a factor. Then you get to page 258, which clearly only has games with titles beginning with S, but the top of the page says R. That last one was probably a simple error, and I'm nitpicking perhaps, but just keep in mind that if you are looking for a particular game and you don't see it where you would expect it, you might have to flip around a little bit. The pages with 5 or 6 reviews are incredibly brief, usually about 4 sentences long. Thankfully, this doesn't happen too often, and is almost understandable for the many sports games with yearly updates. However, if you want to learn more about Frogger or Shonen Jump's One Piece, you're not going to get much out of these short reviews. And at this size, and even when there are 4 reviews on a page, the screenshots are too small to be of much use. But if they are bigger, then there's less text. Fight Night Round 2's console-exclusive inclusion of Super Punch-Out, originally for the Super NES, seems like it would be noteworthy, but it isn't mentioned at all, and being limited by space could have been why. A quirky thing I noticed when reading all the reviews are repeats of particular phrases, such as if a game is a reference for the genre. This is noticeable because I read all the reviews straight through, and surely this is less of a concern if you only read a few random reviews here and there. As the reviews are independent of each other, the use of a phrase shouldn't exclude its use in another review. I'm not going to knock off points for the lack of a thesaurus though. Ultimately, what do I think of the GameCube Anthology? I want to give this high quality tome a perfect score because its history section is second to none, and has seemingly covered all of the hardware and software. The reviews are indeed well done when they are given enough space. But, due to a number of short reviews with incredibly tiny screenshots, plus the alphabetization oddities, this is essentially an encyclopedia after all. Keep this from being totally perfect. So, I'll give it a 4.5 out of 5. Do I recommend this book? Well, at this time, I'm aware of no other book like this for the GameCube, so it's the best by default. But it is a quality book. I just felt it could be a tiny smidge better, but again, I'm nitpicking. And anyone who has this, including myself, is most certainly thrilled that this book exists. Collectors most definitely should pick it up. Now that several years have passed, the GameCube and its games are seemingly quite collectible and better appreciated now, despite its commercial shortcomings at the time. And if you missed out on the GameCube, and sales suggest you might have, then this is a good guide to get into it. Buy it from Geeks-Line Publishing's website, where you can also pick up other anthology books. Thanks for watching! Now, do you want me to do more reviews on books about games? Do you like my Expo vlogs? Or my Geek Fiction Multiverse crossover series? Feel free to leave a message in the comment section below. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe. That's it for now. See ya!